At 17:31 hours on November 4, 1944, Squadron Leader Brans Burbridge strapped into the cockpit of his de Havilland Mosquito night fighter at RAF Swanington. At 23 years old, this former conscientious objector had flown 47 combat missions in 8 months, but tonight's task was different. He and his navigator, Flight Lieutenant Bill Skelton, were not hunting bombers. They were hunting the hunters. The statistics were grim. In October alone, German night fighters had slaughtered 217 RAF heavy bombers using deadly upward-firing Schrager-Musik cannons to strike from the blind spots below. The Lancaster and Halifax crews often never saw what hit them. To counter this invisible threat, the RAF formed the secretive No. 100 group, equipped with mosquitoes fitted with electronic ears, the Serrate detector. This device could pick up the radar emissions of German night fighters like the Liechtenstein SN-2 from miles away, turning the hunters into detectable prey. As the twin Merlin engines roared to life, Burbridge and Skelton's mission was clear. Penetrate occupied Europe, locate the German night fighters using their own radar signals, and shoot them down before they could reach the bomber streams. It was a game of shadows and signals. Skelton's screens glowed in the dark cockpit, the Serrate sweeping the blackness ahead for the telltale 490 to 600 megahertz pulses. Crossing the coast at low altitude to avoid radar, they climbed over Belgium. Somewhere in the void ahead, seasoned Luftwaffe aces with dozens of kills were taking off from bases like Bonn Hungalar, gathering for another night of slaughter. But tonight, the paradigm shifted. For the first time, the masters of the dark found themselves not as pursuers, but as the pursued. The mathematics of the night war were about to be challenged not by more guns, but by better intelligence. The success of their hunt would be measured not in bombs dropped, but in bombers saved. The first signal emerged from the static at 19:04 hours. A faint pulsing return on Bill Skelton's Serrate screen, crossing from starboard to port. In the absolute blackness over Germany, it was the only sign of life. A German night fighter, its Liechtenstein radar actively sweeping the sky for prey. Squadron Leader Brans Burbridge banked the Mosquito smoothly, letting the nimble wooden airframe turn into the pursuit. This was the hunt they had trained for, a game of distant signals and silent approach. The Serrate gave bearing but not range. Skelton had to estimate distance by the strength of the enemy's own radar emissions, calling out adjustments in a calm, measured tone. Left 2 degrees. Steady. Contact strengthening. Burbridge reduced power slightly, descending to stay in the blind spot below the target's radar beam. At 1,500 feet, a dark silhouette materialized against the slightly lighter sky. A Junkers Ju-88, a twin-engine workhorse of the night fighter force, its exhausts glowing dull red. The German crew, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, were hunters in their prime, scanning ahead for the bomber stream, completely unaware that a more specialized predator had slipped onto their tail. Burbridge closed the gap with lethal patience. At 800 feet, he armed the Mosquito's 4 20mm Hispano cannons. His philosophy, shaped by his faith, was precise. Aim for the engines, disable the machine, give the crew a chance to bail out. The Junkers Ju-88 held a steady course, a perfect target. At 400 feet, Burbridge's finger tightened on the trigger. A 3-second burst tore from the Mosquito's belly, a concentrated stream of cannon shells that walked directly into the Junkers' port engine. Fire erupted immediately, a violent orange flower blooming in the night. The stricken aircraft rolled hard right and plunged away, trailing a comet's tail of flame. Skelton noted the time, 19:06 hours, and confirmed the kill. They didn't wait to see it hit the ground. The fight was already moving.
But as Burbridge pulled up to avoid debris, Skelton's voice cut through the intercom, urgent and tense. New contact, range 2 miles, crossing left to right. The sky, which had felt like their private hunting ground seconds before, was suddenly crowded. The destruction of the Ju-88 had not been noticed. Another set of Liechtenstein pulses was painting the darkness, and this one was searching much closer to home.
The single hunting contact Skelton had warned of was just the beginning. By 1923 hours, as they approached the area southeast of Cologne, his Serrate screen began to illuminate like a city skyline. Not 1 or 2, but 6, then 8 distinct radar returns pulsed in the darkness, all orbiting a central point. The tactical picture became terrifyingly clear. They had found a Himmelbett, 4-poster bed interception zone. German night fighters were stacking over their own airfield at Bonn Hangelar, a major base for NJG-1, holding at staggered altitudes and waiting for ground control to vector them into the incoming British bomber stream. Below, the faint hooded lights of the runway complex glittered like distant stars. Burbridge and Skelton were now on the periphery of a lethal, swirling hive. The standard protocol would have been to pick off stragglers from the edge, but in a moment of tactical audacity that would define their legacy, Burbridge made a different call. He reduced power and descended gently, easing the Mosquito not away from the swarm, but directly into its orbital pattern. They slipped into the circuit between 2 unsuspecting German aircraft, becoming a wolf in a flock of sheep. In the pitch black, with no visual identification possible, and every crew's radar focused outward, the Mosquito's distinct twin-engine silhouette was just another shadow joining the dance. For 90 nerve-shredding seconds, they flew in formation with the enemy. Skelton monitored his scopes, his voice a low whisper reporting distances. 1,500 feet to the J-88 ahead, 1,800 to the Bf-110 behind. The normal roar of the Merlins felt deafeningly conspicuous, but the German pilots, tuned to the drone of their own Jumo and DB engines, noticed nothing amiss. They were professionals executing a routine patrol, their attention fixed on the ground controller's voice and the empty sky ahead where the bombers would soon appear. Burbridge's hand rested on the throttle, making minute adjustments to maintain station. The sheer improbability of the situation was its own protection. This was the pinnacle of the intruder concept, not just hunting in enemy skies, but infiltrating their very formations. The calculus was simple yet profound. Every fighter destroyed here over its own home was one that would never reach the Lancaster streams. But the tension was a living thing in the cockpit. One errant bank into a navigation light's glow, one unexpected order from German control for a roll call, and the entire swarm would turn on them in an instant. They were safe only as long as they remained invisible, a ghost in the enemy's machine. With the cold precision of a surgeon, Burbridge selected his target from the rotating swarm, a Messerschmitt Bf-110 ahead and slightly above them. This was no ordinary prey. It was the Luftwaffe's dedicated night fighter, a stable gun platform armed with 4 forward cannons and the deadly Schrägemusik. Its 3-man crew represented the elite of the German night defense. Closing to 500 feet, Burbridge held the sight's pipper on the port engine, a stark reflection of his consistent doctrine. His thumb pressed the firing button. The 4 Hispanos erupted, their tracers stitching a line of destruction through the darkness before slamming into the Messerschmitt's power plant. The effect was catastrophic. The engine disintegrated in a fireball, the fuel tank behind it detonating a second later and shearing the wing. The Bf-110, a moment ago a formidable hunter, snapped into an uncontrolled roll and vanished from the formation, a torch spiraling toward the earth.
Burbridge instinctively pulled up and right, his Mosquito clawing for altitude and clearing the debris. The kill was clean, professional, and devastatingly efficient. Yet, in that moment of supreme tactical success, the delicate veil of their invisibility was torn apart. The violent orange flash of the exploding fighter had acted like a colossal camera flash in the night, silhouetting the unmistakable twin-boom profile of the Mosquito for every other pilot in the circuit. The reaction was instantaneous and electrifying. The orderly orbital pattern shattered into chaos. Skelton's screen, once a map of predictable blitz, became a storm of erratic vectors as German pilots threw their aircraft into evasive dives and turns. Simultaneously, the ether crackled to life with frantic German voices as ground control blared a panicked warning, Achtung, in der Nähe, alle Jäger ausweichen. Attention, intruder in the vicinity, all fighters evade. The hunters' perfect ambush had turned into a desperate game of survival. They were now a single revealed British aircraft deep over enemy territory, surrounded by a pack of enraged and experienced night fighters whose home base they had just violated. The element of surprise, their greatest weapon, was gone, replaced by the piercing awareness that every shadow in the sky now held a potential threat. Their mission had just transformed from a stealthy hunt into a frantic battle for escape.
The warning from ground control had transformed the sky into a hunting ground, into a trap. As Burbridge navigated the chaos of scattering fighters, Skelton's voice crackled with new urgency. A single aggressive contact was turning towards them, closing fast at a range of just 1,200 yards. This was no unaware bomber hunter. This was a German pilot who had seen the flash of the dying Bf-110 and was now coming to investigate or to exact revenge. In the pitch black, with a combined closing speed of over 400 knots, Burbridge had seconds to choose. The instinct was to brake, to dive away and use the Mosquito's superior speed to flee. But breaking off would give the German the tactical advantage, allowing him to dictate the fight. In a split-second decision that defied conventional night-fighting doctrine, Burbridge held his course. He would meet the enemy head-on, a terrifying joust in the dark where the first accurate burst would win. The Ju-88's shape rapidly grew in the windscreen, its own gun suddenly winking as the German gunner opened fire. Tracers ripped past the Mosquito's port wing. Burbridge waited, heart hammering, his entire world narrowed to the glowing gun sight. At 200 yards, point-blank range, he pressed the trigger, unleashing a final concentrated 5-second storm from all 4 cannons. The last of his ammunition streaked across the void, hammering into the Junker's nose and cockpit. The enemy fighter shuddered, its engines belching flame, before it pitched up violently and cartwheeled away into the darkness. Silence and sudden emptiness followed the cacophony. Skelton confirmed the kill, their 4th of the night, at 1940 hours. In just 37 minutes, they had destroyed a quartet of the Luftwaffe's night fighters. The operational tempo was unprecedented. Most crews counted themselves lucky with 1 victory per tour. As they turned northwest for home, low on fuel and ammunition, the immediate danger receded, but the magnitude of their achievement began to settle. They had not merely survived an intruder mission, they had decimated a German fighter assembly over its own airfield, a tactical masterstroke that would soon be dissected in briefing rooms. The record was staggering, but the true, unexpected twist lay in the cold mathematics of war. As intelligence would later reveal, each destroyed night fighter represented a cascade of saved lives. With the average German ace claiming 6 bombers a year, Burbridge and Skelton's single-night tally had potentially saved dozens of Lancaster and Halifax crews from annihilation. Their success was not just a personal victory, but a devastating proof of concept for the Serrate system and the aggressive intruder tactic,
a blueprint that would soon be distributed across the entire Number 100 group to systematically dismantle the German night fighter force from within.
The flight back to RAF Swanington was a transition from the adrenalized silence of combat to the heavy quiet of exhaustion. With the Dutch coast behind them and the North Sea sprawling below, Burbridge and Skelton allowed themselves to feel the strain of the past hours, a profound fatigue that was more mental than physical. The Mosquito, its ammunition nearly spent but its airframe untouched, droned steadily homeward as a thin dawn began to bleed on the eastern horizon. Their debriefing at 2100 hours was a meticulous, understated affair. Intelligence officers listened with growing astonishment as Skelton recounted the Serrate intercepts, the orbital infiltration, and the 4 engagements. The confirmed claims, 1 Bf-110 and 3 Ju-88s destroyed in a single sortie, were unprecedented in the history of the night fighter force. The immediate legacy of their mission was not just a line in the logbook, but a seismic shift in tactical understanding. Within days, a distilled report of their methods, emphasizing the boldness of joining the enemy's formation, circulated through Number 100 group. Their sortie became the definitive case study, transforming their personal skill into doctrine. Other Mosquito crews were now equipped with a proven aggressive blueprint to dismantle the Himmelbett system from within. The broader legacy, however, was measured in the cold, brutal arithmetic of Bomber Command's survival rates. The 4 night fighters destroyed on November 4th were just the beginning for Burbridge and Skelton, whose personal tally would climb to 21 by war's end. But the real victory was institutional. The widespread adoption of their intruder tactics, powered by the Serrate system, directly contributed to a sharp decline in bomber losses. From November 1944 onward, the fearful phenomenon of Schrage-Musik attacks from below became less frequent as the German night fighter force was forced onto the defensive, plagued by the constant threat of the Mosquito terror over their own bases. The hunters had been relentlessly hunted, their sanctuary violated. The ripple effect saved an estimated 1,200 Allied airmen. In a final, poignant twist to their warrior legacy, both Burbridge and Skelton, the war's most successful night fighter partnership, chose to lay down their arms permanently after VE Day. Driven by the same moral compass that had guided Burbridge's aim for engines rather than cockpits, they both studied theology and dedicated their subsequent lives to peace and ministry, finding their ultimate purpose not in the darkness where they fought, but in the light they later sought to bring to others. The phenomenon of the invisible hunter evolved from a tactical advantage into a psychological weapon in the winter of 1944-45. Brans Burbridge and Bill Skelton, their partnership now honed to an instinctual level, continued their relentless patrols. Each successful sortie added to their tally and amplified a growing myth within the Luftwaffe's night fighter arm, the Mosquito Schreck, or Mosquito Terror. German crews, already exhausted from battling the bomber streams, now faced a new paralyzing fear during their most vulnerable moments, on takeoff, while orbiting assembly points, and especially on final approach, with fuel low and guards down. The mere suspicion of a Serrate-equipped Mosquito in the area could disrupt entire interception orders, as pilots would momentarily shut down their vital Liechtenstein radars to avoid detection, blinding themselves to the very bombers they were supposed to catch. Burbridge and Skelton's personal score climbed relentlessly, reaching 21 confirmed victories by January 1945, making them the highest-scoring RAF night fighter partnership of the war. They had surpassed the legendary Cat's Eyes Cunningham, not through better night vision, but through superior electronic eyes and unmatched audacity. The true impact of their hunting, however, was measured not in medals, but in the lives of bomber crews who never knew their names. Each destroyed Ju-88 or Bf-110 represented a direct subtraction from the force that hunted Bomber Command. Air Vice Marshal Addison of No. 100 Group calculated the strategic value in stark terms.
By effectively neutralizing 21 enemy crews, Burbridge and Skelton had potentially saved over 1,200 bombers and more than 1,200 airmen. Yet, in a profound twist that defined their characters, both men carried the weight of their lethal efficiency not with pride, but with a deep moral gravity. Burbridge's consistent mantra, "Aim for the engines, not the cockpit," was more than a tactical choice. It was a conscious effort to offer the enemy a chance at life, even as he destroyed their machine. This ethos, born of their strong Christian faith, created an internal paradox. They were consummate hunters who took no pleasure in the kill. This tension would ultimately define their post-war destiny, steering them away from the military glory they had earned and toward a path of peace and reconciliation, seeking to heal the very world they had fought so skillfully to defend.
With the surrender of Germany, the most successful night fighter partnership in RAF history simply walked away. Brans Burbridge and Bill Skelton, who had mastered the art of hunting in darkness, turned decisively toward the light. Rejecting offers of prestigious peacetime commissions, both men made an identical and quiet decision. They would study theology. Burbridge went to Oxford, first taking a degree in history before focusing on divinity. Skelton attended Trinity Hall, later becoming an ordained Anglican priest. The same focus and precision that had guided them to 21 victories were now channeled into scripture and pastoral care. For decades, they rarely spoke of the war. Burbridge's logbook and medals were stored away, his public life dedicated to youth ministry with the Scripture Union. When occasionally pressed, his response was always the same, echoing the principle that had guided his gunnery. "I aimed for engines, not cockpits. We wanted to stop the machine, not kill the men." Their extraordinary war record faded into obscurity, a conscious choice by men who believed their true service to humanity was just beginning. The full circle of their journey, from hunters to healers, found its most poignant expression decades later. In his final years, Burbridge, like many veterans, faced financial strain, and his hard-earned medals were sold for care. The nation had largely moved on, but the legacy of their actions remained etched in history. Bill Skelton passed away in 2003, and Brans Burbridge died in 2016 at the age of 95. The story of their unparalleled combat success was eventually rediscovered by historians, cementing their tactical genius. Yet the ultimate and unexpected twist of their tale lies not in the forgotten medals and the confirmed kills, but in the lives they chose to live afterward. They defined their ultimate victory not by the enemies they shot down in the darkness over Germany, but by the decades of quiet service, peace, and guidance they offered in the light of peace, proving that true strength lies in the capacity to build after destroying, and to heal after having fought.